Welcome back to Casefile Stories. Tonight it's raining outside, and we're going to delve into unsolved mysteries, strange disappearances that to this day, police and families have yet to find answers. No screaming, no jarring noises, just the sound of storytelling in the falling rain to help you relax. Before we begin, put on your headphones, dim your phone screen, and find the most comfortable position. This video is designed to lull you to sleep. So, if your eyelids get heavy in the middle of the story, don't fight it. Just let sleep come naturally. Now, take a deep breath and listen to the first case. Tonight, we're going to settle into a quiet mystery. One that feels like a long, slow snowfall. It's the disappearance of Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student who vanished after a late winter car accident on a dark road in New Hampshire on February 9th, 2004. As you listen, you don't need to solve anything. You don't need to hold the details tightly. You can let them drift past, like pale breath in cold air, like snow that softens every edge. We'll move gently through her background, then the timeline of that evening, then the quiet crash site, and finally, a few theories, only briefly, before we let the story rest with one lingering question. Maura Murray grew up in Massachusetts, in a family that knew the rhythm of busy days, school, sports, siblings, plans. She was known as a strong athlete, especially in running, and as someone who could push herself through hard things. She attended the United States Military Academy at West Point for a time, studying chemical engineering before deciding it wasn't the right fit. Later, she transferred to the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, where she studied nursing, a demanding path that asks for focus, patience, and long hours. If you imagine her then, try to picture something ordinary and human. A young woman in a campus hallway, shoulders slightly hunched against winter air that follows people indoors. A student with books, deadlines, and the quiet pressure of becoming someone. In the days leading up to her disappearance, there were signs of stress and upheaval. Events that don't necessarily look dramatic from far away, but can feel heavy up close. Public accounts describe a cluster of personal and practical troubles, the kind that can make a person feel restless, unsteady, eager for distance. And then comes that Monday, February 9th, when she made choices that still don't fully explain themselves. Winter in northern New England has a particular quiet. Even when it isn't actively snowing, the world can look snow-made, banks piled along the roadside, trees dusted in pale crust, yards smoothed into gentle mounds. The air holds sound differently. Tires hiss softer. Voices don't travel as far. On February 9th, Maura sent emails saying she would be away for about a week due to a death in her family. Something her relatives later said had not happened. It's one of those details that feels both simple and strange. A sentence typed quickly, a small untruth that opens into a larger unknown. That afternoon, she withdrew $280 from an ATM, then purchased about $40 worth of alcohol, including items like Bailey's, Kahlua, vodka, and a box of wine. Security footage reportedly showed she was alone. Later in the afternoon, she left the Amherst area in her car, driving north. The last recorded activity from her phone was checking voicemail around 4:37 p.m. After that, there is only the road, and time sliding forward into evening. If you've ever driven through winter dusk, you know the way the light fades, the sky draining from blue to slate, the roadside turning into dark shapes, the last bit of color caught in the thin line of the horizon. Hours pass. She travels into New Hampshire, toward the White Mountains region, an area she knew, at least in pieces, from family trips and hiking. Then, sometime after 7 p.m., on Route 112, also known as Wild Amanausuk Road in the town of Haverhill, her car ends up off the road at a sharp corner near a home. At 7:27 p.m., a local resident called authorities to report the accident. It was the kind of call that happens in rural places when a sound doesn't belong, when the night is quiet and then suddenly, a thump, a scrape, an impact muffled by snowbanks and cold air. A few minutes later, a passing motorist, often identified in reporting as a local school bus driver, stopped and spoke with the driver. He offered help. She declined, saying she had already called for assistance, even though the area was known for poor cell reception. There is something hauntingly ordinary about that moment. A short conversation in the cold, two people separated by uncertainty, politeness and discomfort, the faint sense that everyone just wants to get home. At 7:43 p.m., that same motorist called police after reaching a place where a call could go through. And then the minutes tighten. According to dispatch logs summarized in detailed timelines, police arrival is recorded around 7:45 to 7:46 p.m. When the officer arrived, Maura was no longer there. Think about that. Softly, without forcing it. A rural road, a winter night, a car angled wrong in the snow, and in a narrow window of time, she disappears into the darkness. What was the weather like in those minutes? Accounts vary, but witnesses later described the night as cold, around the mid-teens to near 20 degrees, with possibly light flurries and snow already present in the landscape. Cold like that doesn't shout. It presses. It stills the skin. It makes the world feel farther away. Let's linger at the place itself. Route 112 in that area is not a wide highway with bright lights and constant traffic. It's a road that can feel like a passage between pockets of human life. Houses spaced out, trees thickening, the landscape rising and folding into itself. The car, described as a black Saturn, was found near a sharp bend, lodged against snow along the roadside. In winter, snowbanks become walls. They guide the road like pale shoulders. They hold the marks of passing, tire tracks, footprints, the occasional scrape of a bumper. In the dark, the woods nearby would have looked like a single mass, tree trunks and branches blending into a deep, steady black. And that kind of forest at night has its own presence. It isn't dramatic. It's simply there, quiet and unmovable, waiting out the season. When police arrived, the car was there. But Maura was not. The scene, in many retellings, has an eerie stillness. A vehicle left behind, the night air cooling the metal, the faint smell of exhaust and cold rubber, and beyond it, only the hush of winter woods. If you imagine stepping out of your own car into that air, you can almost feel how quickly the cold takes your breath. The road would be dark except for headlights and whatever small lights emergency vehicles brought with them. Snow would reflect those lights in a muted way, not sparkling, but dull white, like paper. No loud chaos, just the quiet confusion of a small incident that should have had a small ending: tow truck, report, ride home. Instead, it opened into a long absence. Over the years, Maura's disappearance has drawn enormous attention and debate, and it remains unsolved. There are a few broad possibilities people return to again and again. One theory is exposure, that after the crash, she left the area on foot, perhaps to avoid trouble, perhaps to find help, perhaps simply overwhelmed, and the winter night did what winter nights can do. In cold conditions, Distance becomes deceptive. Minutes become heavy. A short walk can turn into disorientation, and the landscape offers many places to be hidden. Dips, brush, snow-covered ground. This theory is often discussed alongside the reality that her car was found near deep woods. Another theory is that she accepted a ride. Some accounts mention that search dogs tracked scent away from the crash area, suggesting she may have moved along the road for a distance. From there, it's possible she got into a vehicle. Maybe someone offering help. Maybe someone she expected. Maybe someone she didn't know. Another possibility is a planned disappearance. Some have wondered whether the emails, the money withdrawal, and the supplies suggest she intended to go away for a time. But others point out that uncertainty doesn't equal intention, and that many people under stress make messy, half-formed plans. Public reporting also notes that her family has strongly disputed the idea that she simply chose to vanish. And finally, the possibility of foul play is often raised, especially in the context of how quickly she vanished after the accident, and the fact that she has never been found. In this view, the crash becomes the moment that made her vulnerable, the moment the night opened up. Those are the big shapes of the theories. Nothing more. Tonight, just outlines, just shadows at the edge of the road. Now we can sit with the theories, quietly, the way you might sit by a window and watch snow settle into the dark. Not to prove anything, not to force a conclusion, just to notice what people have wondered and why. Because in Maura's case, the theories don't feel like loud arguments. They feel like faint tracks in powder, disappearing as soon as you try to follow them. The tandem driver theory begins with a simple, uneasy thought. What if Maura wasn't truly alone on that road, even if she appeared alone in the moments that were witnessed? Earlier in the day, surveillance footage at the ATM and liquor store is said to show Maura by herself, which makes the idea of a companion less straightforward. So the tandem theory usually shifts towards something subtler. Not someone beside her in the car, but someone behind her, following at a distance. An escort vehicle, a second set of headlights, keeping pace on winter highways. Close enough to find her, far enough not to be noticed. And then there is the detail that keeps returning in discussions. A red pickup truck reportedly seen in the area that evening, often connected to a sighting near a small general store called the Swiftwater Stage Shop, less than a mile from the crash site. In a transcript connected to the Murray family's podcast project, a local woman is described noticing something that felt off during her walk to the store. Her attention drawn to a red truck moving slowly, lingering in a way that didn't match the sleepy rhythm of a rural winter night. The story, as it's been told, becomes almost cinematic in its simplicity. Cold air, a quiet road, a truck that seems to pass and reappear, and then later, the accident down the road. It's important to keep our footing here. These accounts are disputed and incomplete, and the truck has never been publicly confirmed as connected to Maura's disappearance. Still, the reason the red truck persists as an idea is emotional as much as logical. It offers a shape for the unknown. If there was a second vehicle, then Maura's disappearance doesn't require her to vanish into the trees. It requires only a door opening, a short conversation, a choice made in the cold. And in winter, people make quick choices because the air hurts, because the dark feels heavy, because the safest option can look like the nearest moving car. The running away theory doesn't begin at the crash. It begins earlier, on campus, when Maura's actions start to look like someone preparing for distance. One detail often mentioned is the email she sent stating she would be away due to a death in the family, something her relatives later said was not true. That message has a strange softness to it, an ordinary excuse, the kind people reach for when they need time but can't explain why. Then there is the money, the ATM withdrawal, and the purchase of alcohol. Not necessarily sinister, not necessarily a plan. It could be what it looks like for a stressed person trying to self-soothe, or trying to pack comfort into a small trip, or trying to blur the sharp edges of a difficult week. And then there are the searches and calls, quiet clues from a computer screen in the early hours. Public timelines describe MapQuest directions searched after midnight toward places like Burlington, Vermont, and the Berkshires, along with later calls connected to travel, including a call about lodging in Bartlett, New Hampshire, and a recorded information line for hotels in Stowe, Vermont. If you imagine those searches, try to imagine them as they likely were. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just a cursor moving, a map loading slowly, a person considering options in the quiet hours when everything feels too loud inside your own head. Was she starting a new life? That's the part that draws people in. The idea that the email, the money, the alcohol, the directions all align into a clean narrative of escape. But another way to see it is simpler. She may have been trying to take a short break, a few days away, without a clear plan, without telling anyone, hoping the road itself would create a decision. And sometimes, in real life, people do exactly that. They go looking for quiet. They go looking for a place to breathe, and they don't yet know what they're running toward, only what they're running from. Years after Maura vanished, an internet artifact appeared that some people found disturbing. A YouTube account associated with the name 112 Dirtbag posted a video around the anniversary of her disappearance. The clip, preserved in online archives after it was removed, shows a man laughing, with on-screen text reading, "Happy Anniversary," and it circulated because it seemed to echo the date, the highway number, and the long-standing mystery. To some observers, it felt like a taunt. To others, it felt like a hoax, the kind of cruel performance the internet sometimes produces when a case becomes famous. What matters, gently, is this. There is no public, confirmed link between that video and Maura's disappearance. The official investigation remains active, and authorities continue to request tips, but they have not presented that clip as proof of anything. And yet, people still mention it, because uncertainty invites patterns, because the mind tries to connect what it can, and because a human voice, laughing into a camera years later, feels too close to a story that already contains too much silence. So the 112 Dirtbag video becomes, for many, less like evidence and more like atmosphere. Another cold gust passing through an already open door. And when you step back, the three theories almost form a quiet triangle. A second vehicle on the road, a private decision to leave, a later echo from the internet, unproven, unresolved. None of them settles the snow, none of them smooths the road into certainty. They simply circle the same winter night and the same small gap in time where Maura was last known to be. Now, let's slow down even further. Picture the last certain, grounded moment. The car at an awkward angle by the snowbank, the curve in the road, the nearby houses with their curtains drawn against the cold, the trees standing still, holding their breath. A winter night can feel endless when you're alone in it. It can feel like the world has gone to sleep without you. And if you're tired, or scared, or simply trying to think, the mind can narrow to small tasks. What do I do next? Who do I call? Where do I go? In so many stories, the clue is loud, a clear turn, a witness direction. But here, the mystery remains quiet. A young woman leaves campus, drives north, has a small crash on a cold road, speaks briefly with a passerby, and then, somewhere between headlights and darkness, she's gone. And that's why this case stays with people. Not because it is flashy, not because it is noisy, but because it is soft-edged and unanswered, like snowfall hiding footprints. So as you rest, let the story become distant. Let the road fade. Let the trees blur into darkness. Let the cold air turn into something you don't have to feel. And before moving on to the second story, hold only this gentle question without trying to solve it. On that quiet New Hampshire road, in the thin slice of time between the crash and the arrival of help, what felt safest to Maura in that moment? Staying near the car or stepping away into the winter night? Next, we're going to tell a story that moves the way a storm moves. Slowly, steadily, with a soft, relentless rhythm. This is the disappearance of Asha Degree, a 9-year-old girl from Shelby, North Carolina, who left her home in the early hours of February 14th, 2000, walking into heavy rain and wind, into darkness, into a night that sounded like water on leaves and power lines humming in the gusts. And as you listen, let the rain be the constant. Let the storm be the background. Steady, unhurried, almost hypnotic. Because on a night like that, the weather doesn't just surround a story. It becomes part of it. It starts in a house that feels ordinary and safe. Asha lived with her family just outside Shelby, the kind of place where the night is usually quiet, where you can hear a refrigerator click on and off, and a hallway creak if someone shifts their weight. In the evening, the family followed familiar routines. Church the day before, school the next morning, small everyday plans that usually hold a child's world in place. Asha shared a bedroom with her older brother. 2 beds in the same room, familiar blankets, familiar shadows. In a family home, nighttime has its own soft sounds. Fabric moving, a mattress sighing, the tiny breathy noise children make when they sleep deeply enough to forget the world. Outside, though, the world was not quiet. That night, the storm was already there, pressing against the neighborhood with wind that rose and fell like a long exhale. Rain came down in sheets, not delicate drops. It struck the roof and the windows with a steady insistence, like fingers drumming without impatience. Just persistence. And at some point in the evening, the power went out. Reports say it was linked to a nearby car accident. The lights vanished, and for a while the house would have been lit only by whatever candles or flashlights the family used, and by the occasional pale flicker of headlights passing in the wet dark. Later, the power returned, around 12:30 a.m. according to public accounts. Asha's father checked on the children. They were asleep, safe in their beds. The rain kept talking at the windows. The wind kept tugging at branches and wires. He checked again later, closer to 2:30 a.m., and everything still looked normal. If you picture that moment, picture it gently. A hallway in a sleeping house. A door opening just enough to look inside. A dim room, the edges softened by darkness. 2 children sleeping while the storm does what storms do outside. Then, somewhere after that, something changed. Asha's brother later recalled hearing the faint sound of her bed. A small squeak, the kind that happens when someone shifts or sits up or slides their feet carefully to the floor. He didn't wake fully. In a shared room, you learn what noises are normal. You learn to keep sleeping. But Asha wasn't only turning over. Sometime in those early morning minutes, when the clocks feel unreal, when the air inside a house is cool and still, Asha got up and began to pack. Investigators believe she took a book bag that had been prepared with several sets of clothes and personal items. We do not know every item. Many details have never been fully made public, but we can imagine the act itself. Slow hands, moving quietly so no one wakes. The bag would have been a familiar object, something used for school, something that usually carried pencils, homework, small everyday needs. Tonight, it became a kind of container for intention, whatever that intention was. A shirt folded and pressed flat, a pair of pants, maybe rolled to fit. Small things gathered from a drawer, things that mattered to a child, even if adults might not understand why. And all the while, the storm continues. Rain raps at the glass like a steady metronome. Wind leans against the house, then pulls away. Thunder may be distant, more felt than heard, a low rolling presence behind the constant wash of water. It's hard to imagine a child choosing to step into that. And yet, Asha did. She left the house quietly, without waking her family. The front door would have opened to air that felt heavy with moisture. The kind of air that clings to eyelashes. The kind of cold that seeps into sleeves. Outside, everything would have been darker than usual. Clouds swallow moonlight. Wet roads reflect what little light exists, turning headlights into long, shimmering streaks. The world becomes a narrow tunnel of visibility. A few yards ahead, and then nothing. Somewhere close by, Highway 18 waited. 2 lanes cutting through the night. In the early morning, rural roads can feel empty, but they're never truly silent. Not in a storm. The rain fills in the spaces. It hisses on pavement and gurgles along ditches. It splashes up under passing tires. Wind shakes bare branches, so they scrape and click against each other like thin bones. Asha began walking along that highway, heading away from home, moving through darkness and water like a small figure in a world made too large. And here, the storm matters even more. Because in pouring rain, your shoulders tighten, your head dips. You turn your face away from the sting of water. You focus on the next few steps, and then the next. Sometime between 3:45 and 4:15 a.m., motorists reported seeing a small child walking along North Carolina Highway 18 in the rain and wind, wearing light-colored clothing, described as a long-sleeved white shirt and white pants. Imagine the scene from inside a vehicle. A driver peering through a windshield streaked with rain. Wipers moving back and forth in a steady rhythm. Headlights slicing into sheets of water. And then, a shape. A small figure on the shoulder of the road. Alone. The sight is so unusual that it stays in the mind even after you pass it. Even after you drive on. Even after you tell yourself there must be an explanation. One motorist later said he turned around, disturbed by the idea of a child being out there at that hour, in that weather. But by the time that moment comes, by the time anyone tries to get close, Asha is already deep inside the storm, deep inside the darkness, walking forward while the rain keeps falling with the same steady patience. The morning came the way it often does after a stormy night, gray, wet, and muted. Rain can make daylight feel dimmer. It turns everything the color of brushed metal, roads slick and shining, yards heavy with water, trees dripping steadily as if they're still catching their breath. At home, Asha's mother woke early to get the children ready for school. She went to the bedroom, expecting the familiar morning scene. 2 sleepy kids, blankets tangled, the small resistance of waking up. But Asha's bed was empty. At first, families often move through denial. You check the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. You call a name softly, then louder. You look for a small outline on the couch, a child curled up somewhere unexpected. And all the while, outside, the rain continues, steady on the roof, steady in the gutters. The family searched the house, then checked nearby, thinking, as many parents might, that she could have gone to a relative's home close by. When she wasn't there, panic took over. Police were called. Soon, the search began. In many missing child cases, people describe the day as frantic. But today, let's keep the tone quiet, because the storm itself already carries the urgency. You can picture patrol cars moving along wet roads, tires whispering over water. You can picture people walking in jackets that darken with rain, calling her name into wind that scatters sound. And then, witness reports. After news spread that Asha was missing, the motorists who had seen her came forward. Investigators have said multiple people reported seeing a small figure walking along Highway 18 in the early morning hours, despite the harsh weather. One account became especially haunting. The motorist who turned around to check on her. He described circling back, approaching carefully. But when his headlights swept over the shoulder again, the child, believed to be Asha, reacted by moving away from the road, leaving the open shoulder and running toward the woods. In a storm, the woods are not welcoming. Branches lash and sway, leaves and pine needles shed water constantly. The ground is soft with mud and slick with wet roots. And yet, she ran into that darkness, away from the road, away from the thin safety of visibility. Investigators later said she was last seen near a point about 1.3 miles from her home, where she disappeared into a wooded area beside the highway. The storm makes that moment feel even more surreal. Because rain erases quickly, footprints soften and fill, scent trails weaken, small items vanish into wet grass. Search dogs were brought in, but reports say they struggled to pick up a clear scent. Another way the weather may have washed away what might otherwise have been traceable. Still, the ground sometimes holds on to small stories. The next day, searchers found something nearby, items in a shed along the highway, near where Asha was believed to have left the roadside. There were candy wrappers, a pencil, a green marker, a yellow hair bow identified as hers, and there was also a small photograph of another girl that the family did not recognize at first. Later reporting suggested it was connected to someone from a wider school community. It's easy to imagine how that shed felt. A small, simple structure. A doorway that doesn't close perfectly. The smell of old wood and damp air. Outside, the rain keeps falling, tapping the roof, running in thin streams down the walls. Inside, the wind is quieter, but it still finds cracks to whisper through. Those small items, candy wrappers, a pencil, are such ordinary things. They don't feel like clues from a mystery. They feel like the leftovers of a child's pause, a moment of shelter, a short stop to breathe. But they were among the only physical traces found near the last sighting. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, then into months. Families in these stories often describe time as something that becomes strange, because life continues, but one part of life stays frozen, waiting. And then, a year and a half later, another discovery surfaced, farther away, and in a form that felt both promising and painful. In August 2001, Asha's book bag was found during a construction project in Burke County, near Morganton, along the same Highway 18 corridor, roughly 26 miles north of Shelby. It had been wrapped in 2 black trash bags, and it was unearthed from the ground, pulled back into daylight after months beneath soil and weather. Just picture that, slowly. A machine scraping earth. Mud thick and dark, the smell of wet clay and cut ground. Then the sudden resistance of something that doesn't belong, plastic, tight around fabric. Black bags, slick with mud, water beading on the surface, and inside, a child's backpack, softened by time, preserved and altered at the same time. The backpack was sent for forensic examination, including to the FBI. Publicly, much about the forensic results has not been shared, but authorities have confirmed certain notable contents. A copy of Dr. Seuss's McElligot's Pool and a New Kids on the Block concert t-shirt, items that did not appear to be hers before the bag was found, and that raised new questions about how her bag traveled and who might have handled it. And once again, the weather feels like part of the story, because a storm doesn't only set a mood, it interferes, it covers, it carries. Rain blurs lines between before and after. Wind bends branches into new shapes. Water moves small things from one place to another. When people speak about Asha's disappearance, they often return to that night, not only because she was so young, not only because she left a safe home, but because she left into conditions that seem almost impossible to choose. Heavy rain and wind in the dark hours before dawn. A child alone on a highway. A sudden movement into the woods. And then, years later, a backpack that had been wrapped, buried and kept from the open air, as if someone wanted it hidden, or saved, or placed. In recent years, investigators have continued to revisit the case, and public reporting has described new searches and renewed attention, including authorities stating they believe Asha was a victim of homicide, though the case remains unresolved publicly. But tonight, we don't need to chase those updates. Tonight, we're just listening to the storm. Because if you imagine that early morning again, Highway 18, darkness, rain sweeping sideways, you can almost hear how quickly the world would erase itself. The rain would wash the road clean. The wind would scatter any small sound. The ditches would fill and overflow, and every step a child took would soften behind her, as if the night were gently, steadily pulling the story closed. It begins the way so many rural nights begin in western Minnesota, with space, not city space, not the kind filled with neon and voices and constant motion. This is field space, wide, patient farmland, stitched together by gravel roads and dark fence lines. The kind of land that doesn't try to entertain you, the kind that simply stretches out and waits. On the night Brandon Swanson disappeared, May 14, 2008, just after midnight, there were no crowds, no bright intersections, no late-night storefronts glowing in your peripheral vision. There were only the open acres, the low silhouettes of trees and outbuildings, and the soft, constant movement of air across the crops and grass. Even in May, the night air can feel cool in that part of Minnesota. Cool enough that, when the wind lifts, it slides under your sleeves and across your cheekbones like a reminder that you're outside. Truly outside. The wind doesn't have much to hit out here. It moves freely. It crosses the fields in long, unbroken lines, carrying the scent of damp soil and last year's dried stalks. And light is scarce. A farmhouse window, far away. A distant yard lamp. A red blink on a tower or an elevator somewhere on the horizon. Otherwise, darkness. Brandon was 19, a student who'd been out celebrating the end of the school year with friends from Minnesota West Community and Technical College's Canby campus. Sometime after 1:30 a.m., he started driving toward home in Marshall. And then, on back roads, something small happened. small enough that it shouldn't have changed a life. His car went into a ditch. Not a violent crash, not the shattering kind. More like a mistake you feel in your stomach before you even fully understand it. The wheels slipping off the crown of a gravel road. The sudden tilt, the soft pull of the ditch grabbing the car and holding it there. Gravel has its own sound when a car leaves the road. It's a brief, rough skitter, stones shifting under tires, a scrape of undercarriage, the thud of suspension settling at an awkward angle. Then, stillness. Engine ticking, wind continuing as if nothing happened. Brandon wasn't injured. He got out. He looked around. All he could see was dark farmland and the suggestion of distance, and then he did what most of us would do. He called home. At 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his parents, Brian and Annette, and told them the car was stuck and he needed a ride. In a rural place, a ride isn't a complicated thing. It's just a set of headlights coming down a road, a familiar voice, a door opening, a simple ending. But right away there was a problem that didn't seem like a problem yet. Brandon wasn't sure where he was, or rather, he was sure, but he was wrong. He believed he was near Lind, a small town not far from Marshall. His parents got into their truck and started driving to meet him, holding the phone close, listening for anything that would help them line up their location with his. And this is where the story turned slow and strangely intimate. Because for 47 minutes, father and son stayed connected by a thin thread of sound, cell signal and breath and wind noise, while Brandon walked through the dark. Try to imagine that phone call the way it might have felt. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just practical voices, trying to solve a simple puzzle. Where are you? I'm right here. No, I don't see you. Then you're not looking in the right place. Out in the fields, Brandon would have been surrounded by the kind of quiet that isn't truly quiet. There's always the wind, always grass whispering against itself, always the faint hum of insects and distant machinery cooling down in the dark. And under his feet, gravel. When you walk a gravel road at night, you don't glide, you crunch. Every step presses stones into one another, a small grinding sound that follows you like a second heartbeat. If you're trying to be quiet, you can't. Gravel refuses. Brandon told his parents he could see lights, distant lights that made him think he was near town. In rural country, lights can be deceptive. A single red beacon, far away, can look like a street light. A yard lamp on a farm can look like a gas station sign. And if you're turned around, if you're tired, if you've been driving late and your mind is working a little slower, you can build an entire map out of one small glow. His parents tried to signal each other with headlights, flashing, watching, waiting for the moment when two sets of beams finally line up. Brandon flashed his car lights. They flashed theirs, and yet nothing matched. So Brandon made a decision that sounds ordinary in the moment and unbearable in hindsight. He decided to leave the car and start walking toward those distant lights. He told his father to head toward a meeting point in Lind, a bar parking lot, and he would walk to them. Still on the phone, still talking, Brandon started moving through the landscape instead of waiting beside the stuck car. And as he walked, he described what he was encountering. Not landmarks in the way we usually mean. No street names, no lit signs. Instead, the language of the countryside. Fences. Again and again. Fence lines that interrupt you without warning, especially at night. In daylight, they're obvious. Posts, wire, the clean geometry of property. In darkness, they appear late. A post becomes visible only when you're close enough to touch it. You stop. You feel for the wire. You look for a gap. Or you climb. The phone pressed to your ear. The wind pushing at your back. Your jeans brushing wet grass. Your hands catching on metal that's cold and slightly damp. During that call, Brandon mentioned being frustrated by those fences, running into another fence, and then another. You can hear the irritation in that kind of moment, even if the voice stays mostly calm. Because fences mean you're not moving the way you planned. They mean you're slowed down, and when you're trying to meet your parents and end the night, being slowed down feels personal. He also talked about water. He told them he could hear the sound of running water nearby. And if you've ever stood in a field at night and listened for water, you know how it behaves. It doesn't announce itself like a roaring waterfall. It's subtler, a rushing hush, low and steady, the sound of flow pressing around reeds and stones. Sometimes you don't notice it at first. Sometimes it feels like part of the wind, until you realize the sound is constant and coming from one direction and growing slightly louder with each step. Brandon was walking through a world without edges, no sidewalks, no street lamps, no clear boundary between road and ditch and field, just land and dark, and the phone call. His father was driving, trying to find him based on a description that couldn't be pinned to a map. And Brandon was walking, convinced he was heading toward town, convinced the lights meant safety, convinced that if he kept moving, the night would resolve. Imagine walking beside him now. You and Brandon on a gravel road where the stones crackle underfoot. The wind comes and goes in long sweeps. It bends the grass. It makes a faint, restless rustle in the ditches. Somewhere far off, a lone light blinks. Steady, patient, indifferent. You can hear the phone connection. A soft hiss, occasional breaks, the tiny digital flutter of a signal struggling to hold on. And you can hear Brandon's breathing. Nothing panicked, just the breath of someone moving through night air, talking between steps. Every few minutes he pauses to orient himself. He listens. He looks. He is trying to match what he sees. Dark shapes, fences, the suggestion of water to what he thinks he knows. And his parents are doing the same from inside their vehicle, scanning roads, turning around, pulling onto shoulders, hoping the next bend will reveal him. The call goes on. Long enough for the night to feel endless. Long enough for frustration to settle in. Long enough for the wind to become a kind of companion. And then, sometime after 2:30 a.m., about 47 minutes into that last call, the thread finally snaps. But we'll step into that moment, slowly. The end of the call is often summarized in one line, one phrase. Brandon suddenly interrupted himself and said, "Oh," and then silence. Not a dramatic hang-up, not a clean goodbye, more like a door closing softly somewhere in the dark, and you realizing, too late, that you needed it to stay open. His parents didn't immediately end the call. They stayed on the line, calling his name, listening for movement, listening for breath, listening for any sound that would explain what had just happened. But there was nothing, just the steady hush of rural night. And what does rural night sound like after the voice disappears? It's not silent in the way people imagine silence. It's wind across fields, low and constant. It's grass moving in waves you can't see. It's the faint mechanical tick of a cooling engine if you're near one, or the distant bark of a dog miles away, carried on the air. And for Brandon's parents, inside a truck, it's also the sound of their own breathing and the tight grip of hands on the steering wheel. They tried calling back, again, and again, and again. Sometimes the phone rang. Sometimes it went unanswered. Nothing returned their son to them. Eventually, as dawn approached, they contacted law enforcement around 6:30 a.m. in public accounts. But here's the cruel part. Even then, even after that terrible quiet, the family was still operating with the wrong map. Because Brandon had told them he was near Lind, and he wasn't. Later, cell phone records showed his calls had come from the vicinity of Taunton Porter, about 25 miles away from where everyone had been looking. His car, a Chevrolet Lumina, was found in a ditch in that rural area, near a gravel road along a county line, with no obvious major damage. That discovery changes the shape of the story, because it means the landscape Brandon was walking through wasn't the one his parents imagined. It means every turn they took in their truck was the right turn for the wrong place. And it means Brandon's long walk, the 47 minutes of gravel crunch and fence lines and running water, was happening somewhere else entirely. Out in farmland, where the distances between homes can feel like distances between worlds. Searchers came. In the early days, they searched by land and air. They walked the fields. They checked ditches and shelter belts, those rows of trees planted to break the wind. They scanned the ground for anything: footprints, disturbed grass, a dropped phone, a hat, a wallet. And yet the place fought back. Farmland is both open and hiding. Open because you can see for a long way in daylight. Hiding because the land is full of small depressions, culverts, ditches, and waterways that become invisible at night. And even in daylight, they can be thick with weeds and shadow. And then there is the water Brandon mentioned. The Yellow Medicine River runs through this region, part of a watershed that cuts across agricultural land, with tributaries and creeks that can be deceptively present even when you can't see them. Search efforts early on focused on the river because of what Brandon said on the phone, because he said he could hear running water, and because dogs reportedly led searchers toward the riverbank in at least one effort. So let's sit with the river for a moment, the way it would have sounded that night. A river in the countryside doesn't always roar. Sometimes it rushes with a low, constant insistence. Water pushing around bends, sliding past grasses, pressing beneath overhanging banks. If you're walking at night and you don't know the river is there, the sound might start as something you can't place. A hush that isn't wind. A continuous movement that doesn't pause. And then, as you move closer, it becomes clearer. Flow. Unmistakable. At night, water can feel closer than it is, because you can't see the distance. The sound travels. It spreads flat across fields and low ground. It can make you think you're nearer than you are, or lead you toward it without you realizing you're choosing it. The river theory, often discussed in this case, suggests Brandon may have reached the Yellow Medicine River or a nearby creek, slipped down a bank, or stepped into water he couldn't see. Not because he meant to, not because he was careless, but because night and fields and fences wear down your sense of direction, and because water at the edge of farmland is rarely fenced or lit. Picture it carefully. A narrow bank, mud softened by spring, grass slick with moisture, wind passing over the top of the water making it sound even busier than it is. And Brandon, tired, still holding a phone, still thinking he's walking into town. If he reached the river, he might have heard it clearly. Running water, steady and close. But hearing something doesn't always protect you from it, not when you're distracted, not when you're stepping around fences and across uneven ground, not when you believe you're almost done. Yet, despite extensive searching over the years, Brandon has never been found. No confirmed trace, no final location. Just the open farmland and the long, unfinished walk. And that's what makes this story feel so uniquely rural. In a city, a person disappears into crowds and corridors. Here, a person disappears into distance, into the way fields can look identical in every direction, into the way a gravel road can keep going past the point you think it should end, into the way a river can curve behind tall grass and keep its secrets under moving water. A Minnesota night that doesn't shout, only breathes. Wind crossing acres of farmland again and again. Gravel shifting under a careful footstep. Fence wire humming faintly when the air touches it. And somewhere out there, the steady, rushing voice of the Yellow Medicine River, moving forward, always moving forward, like time itself, washing the edges of a mystery until the edges feel smooth and unreachable. Tonight we walk through 3 mysteries: Maura Murray, Asha Degree, Brandon Swanson. 3 names moving through dark roads, stormy fields, and long stretches of silence. And even though those questions still live out there, somewhere beyond the reach of porch lights and warm rooms, you don't have to carry them now. Let them be heavy, and then let them become distant, because you are safe here, right here in this quiet moment, with nothing to solve, nothing to chase. So, gently, relax your shoulders. Let them drop. Unclench your jaw. Let your tongue rest. Close your eyes, if they aren't already. And now, give your attention to only one thing: the sound of the rain. Let it wash over the corners of your thoughts. Let it soften the edges until the night feels simple again. And, in a whisper, if these stories kept you company tonight, please subscribe to Casefile Stories. We will be here with more rain and more stories soon. Now, drift into silence, into sleep. Good night.